Thank you, Martin. Well, good evening. It gives me great pleasure to introduce tonight's lecturer, who is both an inspirational leader in the field of mental health research and therapy, and a high-profile advocate of the importance of scientific rigor in guiding mental health policy. Professor David Nutt is a psychiatrist and internationally renowned researcher in the field of neuropsychopharmacology. For those of you that don't know what neuropsychopharmacology is, it's the study of brain transmitter systems and the action of drugs that interact with these, thereby affecting our psychology and mental state. His work has covered a wide range of topics, but he's perhaps most widely recognized for his work he's done on characterizing the role of one particular transmitter called GABA and its receptor, including the modulation by a class of drugs called the benzodiazepines. He's also recognized for work in developing methods for the study of brain distribution of these receptors and for receptors of another transmitter called serotonin, in order to examine how they are altered in people suffering with various psychiatric conditions. And he's also known for his work on the brain circuitry that underlies the processes of addiction and anxiety and the ways that these disorders may be treated. Professor Nutt undertook his medical training in Cambridge and at Guy's Hospital in London before moving to the University of Oxford, initially as a clinical scientist at the Radcliffe Infirmary and then as a lecturer in the Department of Psychiatry. From 1986 to 1988, he moved to the USA as a Fogarty visiting scientist at the National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism in Bethesda, where he developed a major program on the effects of alcohol on the brain. Returning to the UK in 1988, he joined the University of Bristol as director of the psychopharmacology unit, which was established under the support of the pharmaceutical company Reckitt & Coleman, which is perhaps better known for its eponymous mustard that you find on our dinner tables. He remained in Bristol for 21 years before moving in 2009 to Imperial College London to establish the Department of Neuropsychopharmacology and Molecular Imaging, which was funded jointly by Imperial College itself and also by the Central and North West London NHS Foundation Trust. And within the department, he holds the Edmund J. Safra Chair in Neuropsychopharmacology, which was endowed by a very large donation from the Edmund J. Safra Philanthropic Foundation and by his wife, Mrs. Lily Safra. This new department will continue Professor Nutt's work in developing positron emission tomography scanning techniques to explore the different receptors of the brain involved in addictions and anxiety, and new cutting-edge scanning techniques to help develop treatments for a range of psychiatric conditions, including depression. During his distinguished research career, Professor Nutt has published over 500 original research articles and has had many honours and held many influential posts. He's a Fellow of the Royal College of Physicians, the Royal College of Psychiatrists and the Academy of Medical Sciences. He holds visiting professorships in Australia, New Zealand and the Netherlands. He's editor of the Journal of Psychopharmacology, and he's held the presidencies of the British Association of Psychopharmacology, the European College of Neuropsychopharmacology, and he's president-elect of the British Neuroscience Association. So with that outstanding research background, it was perhaps not surprising that he was invited in 2001 to join the government's Advisory Council on the Misuse of Drugs, initially as chair of their technical committee, and from January 2008 as the council chairman, taking over from Professor Sir Michael Rawlins of this university. However, his views that the advice of the council and the ensuing government policy should take into account the scientific, social and economic evidence of relative harm of different drugs led him into deep political waters. Tonight, Professor Nutt will recount the events surrounding this and some salutary lessons in his lecture entitled Science, Politics and Drug Policy, Past Conflicts and Future Opportunities. David.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, thank you, Colin, and thanks for the invitation. I don't know, I get more invitations to speak at Newcastle than anywhere else. But I always take them up, you'll be pleased to know. And I hope after this one you'll invite me back, because I'm proposing to be somewhat controversial, as is in my nature, but also hopefully fairly honest. So just, you've heard a bit about me. I'll just share with you a little bit more of my background. I'm a psychiatrist. I've been working in the field for about 30 years. I've been researching most of that time. I went into medicine to do research on the brain and into psychiatry because, to be quite frank with you, that's the most interesting of the disorder. Well, I think psychiatric disorders are the most interesting of the brain disorders. I've had 4 children. Thankfully, they've all survived teenage years, so I've seen an awful lot of what goes on in that period. The youngest is 19, so she's nearly out of it. They've all survived. I've just about survived. But of course, the reason I'm here is because I'm an ex-government drugs advisor. That's why I think most of you are interested in what I've got to say. But I can switch to talking about PET scanning if you really demand. Yeah, there's one of the slight problems. There it goes. Okay. So this is perhaps the best demonstration, or there was a description of the sacking. This is the Guardian, this week caricature, and what you see, there are a few points to make about that front page, which I thought it's rather remarkable. I don't normally wear a white coat, although I've taken to doing it recently because the visual media insists that scientists have to wear white coats, so I got one specially made. Being large. That's the book of cannabis falling from my hand. But the key thing is the bottom left-hand corner, the scales of justice. You see on the left-hand side beer and cigarettes, and on the right-hand side these packets of, well, I don't know what they are. I don't suppose anyone does, but anyway, they're synthetics. So that was the sort of debate that was going on at the time of the sacking. But there's another really interesting observation on this front page. The top left, Agassiz crystal meth, confession. So for those of you who were too young to remember Andre Agassi, he was a tennis player. He won Wimbledon. And soon after he won Wimbledon, he tested positive for methylamphetamine, which is what the Americans call crystal meth. And that presented enormous problems to the tennis authorities because their rules said if he tested positive, he'd be banned for at least 2 years. So they adopted what you might call the British solution. They thought, well, we'll ask him. So they said, Andre, did you actually take crystal meth? And he said, no, of course not. They said, OK, that's all right, fine. So he played on for a few more years, won a few more tournaments, and then when it came to writing his autobiography, either because his conscience was weighing him down, or more likely because his bank balance was a bit light, he decided to come clean about it and explain that he'd actually had taken it. And he probably sold a few 100,000 more books and probably doubled the amount the newspapers paid for serialization simply because he told us that he'd done something he shouldn't have done. And that really, I think, encapsulates the ambiguity in which we deal with drugs. We kind of like it if other people take them and suffer from them, and we're interested in it, but we're also very scared to actually talk about it when it affects us in our kind of day-to-day life. So that's the issue that really I think is at the back of much of the discussions we've had in the media over drugs in the last few years. And the media are very divided. My sacking was, it ran and ran, and I suppose the reverberations are still going on today. That's again, one of the reasons I'm here, and that people still remember it. And it was one of the reasons it was memorable was that the media were very divided. The broadsheets were very supportive of me. The BBC were very supportive also and very angry with the way I've been treated. But there were opposing views. These are some of my favorite names. And Melanie Phillips is a woman who I've had a fair few ding-dongs with over the years. And this statement that I'm part of a manipulative, subversive, and lethally dangerous clique is one I feel particularly proud of. But the problem is, I haven't yet found anyone else who's in it. So if anyone in the audience is part of it, would you let me know afterwards? But I'd like to join up. And Paul Hitchens, you probably heard me having an interesting dialogue with Paul Hitchens on Radio 4 the other morning. He didn't call me ninny brain then, but he certainly was pretty rude. So things were polarized. Private Eye loved it, of course, because my name actually really lends itself to a whole series of puns, and that's how it is. And what was interesting was that the public response was really quite remarkable. Students for a Sensible Drug Policy set up a Facebook site for me. I didn't really know what Facebook was until then. And they managed to get over 30,000 supporters. 2,000 scientists wrote to the Prime Minister demanding my reinstatement, which inevitably didn't happen. And there was a protest outside Downing Street. That's an image from that protest. So it clearly, touched a nerve of many people. And I had hundreds, maybe thousands of emails, 95% being supportive of my position. So why was I sacked? Well, it's not entirely clear. We're waiting for Alan Johnson to write his memoirs, which might be sooner than we expected, perhaps. But anyway, he's not here, is he? It's a long way away, I guess. They said I got involved in policy, and all I said was that current policy was not evidence-based. They said I was giving mixed messages. And what I said was that alcohol, because it's a pretty toxic sedative like GHB, which we just banned, would probably be banned if it was invented today. They said they lost confidence in me, which translates into that statement. And they said I didn't inform them I was going to publish a lecture I gave. A lecture I gave in July. I was sacked in October. That was the lecture. And I have to say, it never occurred to me that an academic working for a government scientific advisory committee would have to ask permission of the government to publish a public lecture. So it's like me having to ask permission to give this lecture today. I mean, it truly never occurred to me. And I have to say, I still to this day cannot understand how anyone could think that sacking me was a reasonable response to someone talking publicly about the kind of issues I'm going to share with you today. Of course, there is another view. It was actually just a cock-up, and that happened a lot in the last government, and things haven't changed greatly. So the science minister was pretty off-put, I think I can say. I spoke to him subsequently, and so his boy was sacked without him even knowing about it, but it was a problem because he was in Japan at the time, so he was in a different time zone racing his classic motor cars. The chief scientist, John Beddington, at my own university, he was very supportive. He said he backed me, and he said that my claims that alcohol and cigarettes were more harmful than cannabis, he said, of course he's right. Unfortunately, he was in Kazakhstan at the time, and phones don't work in Kazakhstan. But it is a moot point whether anyone would have been able to do anything, because I think they were determined to get me, and you'll see why later. And the core of all this is what I've called the science v policy conundrum. And there's been a view in politics really established by Winston Churchill, who made the very infamous phrase now that scientists should be on tap and not on top. And I've heard that many a time in the last year. But the idea is that scientists do the science, politicians do the policy, and there the twain shall meet. But sadly, and particularly in the last government, we saw that when it suited them, politicians were really quite happy to do science. We had Gordon Brown telling us that skunk is lethal. Skunk is a new form of cannabis with high-strength THC. Now, I don't know if any Scots people here, but is lethal a special word in Scotland? Does it mean something other than kill you? Because, of course, skunk is no more lethal than any other form of cannabis. So that is a complete misunderstanding. And then we had Jackie Smith saying that ACMD got it wrong on ecstasy and brain damage. And we had Alan Johnson saying we got it wrong on cannabis and schizophrenia. The ACMD, being the committee set up by the government many years ago, and I'll talk about that shortly, spent 7 years, 3 reports on cannabis, looked at over 2,500 papers. But we still got it wrong because when he spoke to a prison governor, the prison governor told him, of course cannabis causes schizophrenia. We say it every day. So prison governors have a better feeling for the science of cannabis than all the experts on the ACMD. And then, of course, when I stood up and said, look, this is just wrong. You should not be making decisions based on this pseudoscience, they got rather irritated. So what did I actually say? Well, I said the drug laws are not based on science, and so they're probably unjust. focusing on drugs like cannabis and ecstasy, which is what the last two Home Secretaries